על הניסים ועל המורכב ועל הגבורות ועל התשובות ועל הנפלאות על הניסים ועל המורכב ועל הגבורות ועל התשובות ועל הנפלאות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה
Welcome to Jewish Life, a program presented in cooperation with the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. I'm your host, Stewart Ain. Every week we present programs of particular interest to the Jewish community, and today we're going to be speaking about the future of the conservative movement. My four guests today from all over the country and the world, Rabbi Ashira Konigsburg, Chief Operating Officer of the Rabbinical Assembly, that's the International Organization of Conservative Rabbis. Rabbi Debra Kamin, spiritual leader of Yisrael, a conservative synagogue in Northfield, Illinois. Sarrae Crane, executive director of Mercaz, that's the Zionist organization of the conservative movement. And Rakefet Ginsberg, she is director of the Masorti movement in Israel, representing conservative Judaism in Israel. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. And what I think is interesting is that leadership of the movement has pretty much now is in the hands of women, which is pretty cool, considering what we had the first woman rabbi in, I think that was 1986, I think. So it's been a long time. We have a first woman vice president of the United States. So we're women are taking over. So welcome. And Rakefet, you are in Israel. This is the first time we've had a woman heading the conservative movement there, correct?
First time a woman is a CEO in the conservative movement in Israel, right? After 40 years, I think it's pretty exciting.
Right. And Debra Kamin, you were the first woman rabbi, sole rabbi, back in 1994 for the whole Chicago metropolitan area, and you held that position or the distinction, I guess, because you were in terms of the largest congregation with a woman as a rabbi for many years. Am I correct?
Too many years I held the distinction.
It was. Right.
Luckily, so, I'm grateful to say I no longer hold that distinction anymore. Women have finally moved up to larger congregations in our movement.
Right. So what does that, how has that changed the movement? The fact that women are there now, they're bringing new things. Am I right, Sarrae?
Absolutely. I think that women are, first of all, we're really beginning to feel that it's egalitarian and that men and women can be in the same room and have discussions as equals and be looked at as equal players, and that they bring something important to the table. So that's really major progress. And we have seen it. Although Ashira, I don't know, maybe you grew up with this more so than we did. We watched it happen.
Well, I can't speak for Rakefet, but I definitely feel that I'm a different generation. I owe a lot of thanks to the women who paved the way before me, but by the time I went to rabbinical school, it was not innovative. It was not anything particular. And so it's a different wave of feminism, I would say.
That's what we wanted to happen. That's exactly what we wanted.
Well, you did it.
Yeah.
I think in Israel, the situation is a little bit different just because we're here in a country that this whole issue of Judaism and who belong, to whom it belongs, and this whole men and women issues are so dramatic every day. Just nowadays there is a huge conversation about how women join the army. What do they do in the army? Can they do everything like men? Every position is open for them or not. So having a woman as the head of a conservative movement is a statement, is actually a statement by saying Judaism can be equal for both of us, for men and women, and we can all share and do that together. And and have this, it's everything is open for both genders, and it's pretty exciting for us, I think.
How big is the movement there in Israel?
The movement in Israel has about 90 congregations around Israel, all over Israel, and 17 branches of the youth movement. It has several thousands of people. It depends how you count, people who belong to congregations in Israel. It's a little bit different than around the world. But this whole issue, many times there were surveys that checked how many people identify themselves as conservative in Israel. And there are about 4% of the Israelis who live in Israel and say we're conservative Jews. So more or less, but we have many people who come just enjoy, several things in their Jewish life in our congregations, and they not necessarily belong to our congregations on a regular day or a regular year.
Now, Debra, you started at your congregation in 1990, but not as the sole rabbi, but you became the sole rabbi 4 years later. What were there any particular pressures that you encountered, or?
Oh, yes. They're in the distant past now, and I don't remember things as well as I used to from 1990. So it makes it more the distant past. But yeah, it was. So I came to be the assistant rabbi of the very beloved and very wonderful Rabbi William Frankel. He was the founding rabbi of the congregation. And so people liked me as the, young, spunky assistant rabbi. But when they had to start consider that he had to retire suddenly due to ill health, and when they had to think about who was going to replace him, the 33-year-old woman next to this 70-year-old seasoned rabbi was a huge stretch for a lot of people. And when they finally made the decision to offer me the position, about almost a third of the congregation resigned. So it was pretty rough going for several years. And even for the people that stayed, I used to hear a lot like, she's, we like her, but she's no Rabbi Frankel. So it took a long time to sort of grow into the congregation, grow into my own, have them accept me. And then, of course, new members that joined that knew not Rabbi Frankel, only, chose the synagogue for various reasons, but only knew me. So we got to a point, it probably took a good 10 years, but we got to the point where everybody had way moved beyond that. And all of those issues have been gone for such a long time that unless somebody asks me about it and I think back, it's all a very distant memory. And of course, I've had my entire career at the congregation.
Right. And if you get an assistant rabbi, it'll be a man?
Well, first of all, we're a smaller congregation now, so I don't know that there will be two rabbis ever. So there's never been any thought whatsoever to, and I would hope that if we ever needed to hire an assistant rabbi, there would be nothing that would say that we would hire a man or a woman. Like there are many congregations that have two men for rabbis. Like why wouldn't you have a congregation that would have either mixed genders or two women, or, that, but we're not there. That's just a theoretical conversation.
No, but when congregations look for a new rabbi, are women really considered now, or it depends on the congregation?
I would say by and large, I would say that for our experience recently in placement, we haven't seen any type of bias of that nature at all. And in fact, we've actually been doing anti-bias training with our congregations and search committees. And the issues are mostly, I wouldn't say issues, the things that they focus on are other types of bias. Because as we know now, there are many types of ways that we all tend to attract to things that we're familiar with. But I would say the big, the next frontier, I think, isn't even male or female. It's the variety of genders that there are, and how the movement is starting to learn and recognize and grapple with recognizing that not everybody fits into that binary. I would say that's the next wave.
Well, what are some of the different qualities that women bring? Sarrae?
That's a very interesting question, because once you get into those, we start talking about stereotypes of gender. And so that's kind of a slippery slope that, and I could tell you things, but the question is that totally true? Because everything I'm going to say about women is also true of some men. And it's not true of some women, that women tend to have lots of friends and to, be, in some ways, I find women chattier. And so it's easier to build relationships. But having said that, I can tell you that I know men where that's also true. So it's more who the person is and how comfortable the person is in the position. So I'd actually like to hear what Ashira has to say about that, because I've got baggage based on my generation.
Right.
And I'm curious as to whether Ashira shares that same baggage, or if she looks at things differently and the world really has changed.
I mean, look, it takes a long time to institute change, but I think now people talk about how people are socialized towards one gender or another. And that's not something that inherently someone who's female identified they are, or someone who's male identified they are. It's what they learn. I think that women often learn to be gentler and softer because they're in environments where when they speak their mind and say what they have to say, that's seen as too aggressive. And so they learn to hold back a little bit. But I think it's constructed, and I think that there are more and more environments where women don't have to hold back. They can be who they are. They can lead the way they are. There's many different successful leadership styles which are appropriate for different environments. And I think the question is more about how society or a congregation or an institution perceives leadership. And I would like to think and hope that we're moving in a direction, and I think we have moved in a direction that is less binary in terms of what it expects of men versus women.
I'd like to add to that, because I've been asked this question for 35 years and I've basically rejected it as a valid, people were curious in the early days. And I will tell you, if you really want to understand different rabbis and you want to have a binary, then I would suggest you look at extroverts and introverts. I think that is a much easier definition of the type of rabbi. So the rabbi that's a congregational rabbi that loves kiddush and loves schmoozing and loves being with people could be a man or a woman. The rabbi, if you're a congregational rabbi, when services are over, would love to be able to retreat to your office and have a quiet hour of study or contemplation. Doesn't matter what gender you are. And I think that, so I think that actually that's a much bigger way of understanding a variety of forms of leadership, depending on where you fall on the extrovert, introvert, categories.
Interesting.
I agree with my friends, and I want to add to that a little bit. I think it's the qualities that we bring with us. It's not necessarily the body that holds those qualities. But I want to add something else to that. I think the fact that there are women in leadership positions bring up some of the issues that women deal with. And I think some of those issues, I'm not saying it's not important for men or they're not aware to that, but it's not an issue for them the same way it's issue for women. It's not just parenthood or things like that, having children, how you get birth, and some issues that are feminine issues. And the fact that in a religious stream you can bring those issues to the front and you can talk to them and you can talk about them and deal with them in an open way. I think those are things that those are issues that women bring to the stage, and they may not be there or be there in a different way if there are no women in the leadership positions as rabbis or as executives or in every leadership position.
Well, somebody said to me that now that the women are in the leadership positions, some might see this as diminishing, or the prestigiousness of the position has now been diminished in some way. Do you think so? No.
I mean, my position didn't exist before me, so I would like to think that my being in it only enhances the position and rather than diminishes it.
Good. Debra, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, because I have to tell you, Stewart, I'm a little surprised that anybody would bring a group of Jewish women leaders together and even ask that question, frankly.
So it's not,
I think all feel who have worked very hard to bring Judaism to people, you know, both here and in Israel, who share a love of Torah, who share a love of, you know, of our people, who see our work as incredibly meaningful and vibrant and compelling. You know, I think that I know these women. I don't know Rakefet really, but I look forward to getting to know you better. But I've worked quite closely with Ashira and with Sarrae, and I think that, you know, I can say that they bring honor to our people every day, and establish the honor of their leadership roles. And I'd like to think that's true for me too. And I don't think, I know that, you know, people talked about that in the church, and in other, you know, and it may be true in other ways, but I think that Jewish women have always had leadership roles. They just didn't have paid leadership roles. But Jewish women have always led. If you look at every unbelievable Jewish women's organization in the United States, for example, and the people power they bring to the table. So I'd like to think, while even though in a religious setting, it was slow going in accepting women's leadership, if you step out of religious life and you just look at Jewish life in general, the Jewish community has been used to women leaders for a very, very long time.
You know, but actually, I want to take issue with part of what you just said. I would like to believe that, and I'm seeing it within the conservative movement, but I actually think we're first beginning to see a breakthrough in the larger community. And if you look at a place like the Conference of Presidents, which has, you know, has had 2 women chair, and in April will have its 3rd. And you look at the way that committees are structured, it's very often that the women's groups are not at the forefront. If you look at the American Zionist movement, it's never had a woman president. It's had a woman chair of the board. And certainly, as we look at women's organizations, everything you just said is absolutely true. There have been incredible, dynamic women at the head of several Zionist organizations, but they've not made it really to the top at the next level. And so, but we're beginning to see that. There's a woman who's chair of AIPAC, and she's not the first. There's a woman currently head of ADL. There's a woman currently head of the American Jewish Committee. Diane Loeb, former head of HIAS, is going to be chair of the Conference of Presidents. So I'm feeling like, while this has been a very long road, that we are getting to a point, but that once we're there, I love what Ashira said. I love the fact that she said by the time she got to rabbinical school, it was totally not an issue. That Debra, I suspect that wasn't totally the case when you were in rabbinical school, that it was still somewhat of a new thing. And I think the fact that the people who were there did such a good job and really belonged at the table, and that the gender issue should never have been an issue in preventing women from being there, is what has gotten us to the point where we're getting closer to being viewed as, oh, that's not an issue. It's just not an issue. And that's where we want to be, that a person needs to be judged on his or her capabilities and particular characteristics and what is brought to the table rather than gender.
Right, but I think, Sarrae, the thing you're pointing to is the idea of how our systems are set up to continue what we're familiar with. And I think that some of the systems that you were talking about and organizations you're talking about, the people who tend to rise up through leadership are people who look like the people who have been in leadership. I think that's true of race. I think it's true of gender identity. I think it's true about sexual orientation. I think if you want to talk about diversity and equity and inclusion, then you have to look at the system as a whole and where are the breakdowns where people don't feel like they have a place, so they never get onto the ladder. And then once you have people involved or climbing the ladder, it takes a very long time. Where you look at Rabbi Kamin, she was first a board member and then an officer of the organization. It took 10 years for her to become president of the Rabbinical Assembly. Those things take a long time, and I hope that they're lagging indicators because we have to address the systemic problems at the bottom, and it'll take time for them to work their way up. I think that's also true, by the way, of the vice presidency and the presidency of the United States, right? That it takes a very long time for those systemic issues to work themselves through. And you know, the fact that it's only now in 2020 that those things have been addressed or are starting to be addressed is remarkable in and of itself, but it's not because of the individuals, it's because the systems hold them back.
Well, of course, Deborah, you're the second RA president, right? Colin
Second
Dorr,
RA
back in
president is a woman.
2009 was the first, right?
Yes, Gila Dror.
Right. And right. But as you say, the glass ceiling, I think, has been broken. Right. There's nothing else. Are there any other positions, Sarrae, in the movement that a woman hasn't held?
Well, now that we have a chancellor, I mean,
Yes. Oh, I did ask Shuli to join us, but she couldn't join us today. But we'll get to her. We'll get again another time. So,
other than president of Men's Club, I don't know of any organization within the movement that would prohibit a woman. On the other hand, I don't think that Women's League is going to have a man president either. So, and I think those groups are okay to exist because there are times people come together and that there's an affinity, and there are times where they don't. And there's some people who never join those organizations and who work differently, that we have lots of paths in, lots of portals to get involved, and that's okay.
Yeah, but I do want to take issue with the idea of a glass ceiling, because it implies that there's just some invisible thing that's up there that, like, you know, for some reason we can't break through, or women have a hard time breaking through. And it's not invisible, and it's not some abstract cause, right? It's the organizations we build are built, can be built in a way that precludes women from success. And that's not something that, like, we have no control over, or that it's a glass ceiling that's up there somewhere right? It's not on women to break that. It's on everybody who's involved and invested in an organization to look at how that organization is structured. Is it including everybody who needs to be included? And if it's not, how can it do better?
I'd like to reflect on something Rakefet said, because I want to imagine for those of us in the States, we're thrilled about having a vice president-elect that is a woman, right? And we're told by our president-elect that he expects her to be the first person in the room and the last person in the room and his partner. Now imagine for a moment if she was a mother of children that were still at home. Would he have even offered her that position? And how would the country react if she was a mother and they were being told, she's going to be, she's going to be working 24/7? People would have feelings. People would have a reaction. It almost seems inconceivable that she would have been chosen under those circumstances. And if she had and said, like any man that raised children in the White House, like President Obama and many others before him, nobody questioned whether he was a good father. But once you put a woman in this position, a public position, then you have all of that kind of pushback too. So Sarrae, what I want to say is I was pushing back not on the idea that we don't have a long way to go to have more equity in these organizations. What I was really more pushing back at the idea that we diminish the position by our very, by our very presence.
Oh, I'm totally agree. No, I don't think we diminish it at all. I think, in fact, that we enhance the position, because if it's not a stereotype, if everybody doesn't have to look like the person who was there before, then it's a better conversation. And that what we want to do is to be more inclusive and to really represent who we are, who is our constituency, and that each part of that constituency needs a voice. And it shouldn't be limited by factors that aren't relevant to the position.
Yes. Where do you see this movement going now in the next 5 years? I won't go out too far, but how do you see the movement? Do you think it's going to change? Do you think, people are talking about one day reform and conservative Judaism coming together? Is that still talk, or that was years ago?
I'm not sure it ever was. But Rakefet, do you want to start with Israel and what you're thinking for the future of the Masorti movement in Israel?
I think we're going through a very dramatic time. I think politically, socially, and since the COVID-19, this all changed, our life here, and it's going to change in the next few years. So we're going to be changed as a society, and we're going to be changed as a movement. And I think the fact that we're here for women, and there are women out there that leading those changes in those times, I think that's changed something, the way we're going to look like in 5 years. I think you're going to be, like Ashira said before, you're going to be much more inclusive. We're going to be much more sensitive, and many things and many issues that we're just by, on the side in the last few years going to be in the center. What is the future of our children? What do we want to give to our children in the next generations? As Jews who look at, equality and think about those values that are so important for us as women and as Jews and as human beings. I mean, it's all together. I'm all together in the same person, and I bring all of that with me. And I want to lead this movement in Israel, at least, to those values. But I think this is a time of change. I think the future is going to be very different from the last 5 years that we saw, and it's definitely. I'm excited the fact that we are here in historical time, women that really can change, in a way, can change the world.
Debra?
9 months ago, I might have had a different answer than I have today. This is basically my office. This is where I've been for 8 months, where our holiday services took place, I think that people are going to come out of this COVID with a real hunger for real live community. I remember in the beginning in March when we were transferring all of our services to Zoom, I was quite worried about it undermining Minyan, undermining synagogue going, because, if you can just do it from home. I think people are going to come out of all of this and be hungry to be part of a real community again, which can only be then good for us. I think people are going to come out with they already have, I think, a deeper yearning for connection, for spirituality, for answers, for meaning. And I know many rabbis report this, congregational rabbis, and this is true for me too. We get better synagogue attendance now than we ever did. Part of it, I think, is the ease of, I walk from my bedroom to my office and I just plop down. But part of it is people really want to connect. They really want to connect, and they're hungry to do that. So I think that will all bode well moving forward when we get through this. I think we will, I hate to be cliche, but I think we will come out of this stronger.
Good. Sarrae?
I agree with everything that Debra just said, and that I think it's not only going to be synagogue activities, it's going to be bigger community activities. It's going to be different kind of involvement at some point, I think we're all going to want to start throwing something at our computers. And we are most grateful for the person who created Zoom and allowed us to create a sense of community and to see each other during this. But we want to reach out and touch people. We want to hear the speaker in the room. We want to be able to corner the speaker at the end of the program. We want to sit next to our friends. And I think all of that is going to really strengthen us. And I think there's going to be incredible travel to Israel, that I think we're all going to want to get on that plane and actually be there. That, we look at those backgrounds, we look at those pictures, but we want to be there. And, and I think we're all missing that. So I think we're going to see a whole rejuvenation and people moving forward, and we're going to benefit from all the time that people spent on Zoom and all the things that we learned. And I agree, we're going to be stronger after this. It's going to be okay. We just have to get there.
Ashira, in the last 30 seconds, how do you see it?
I agree with everyone else, but I also want to add that there were trends that were trending before COVID that I think COVID has accelerated. And I think that we're going to see, because we've been shaken outside of our past experiences and how we always used to do things, I think we're also going to see a whole host of new innovations and new ways of seeing things that this experience, which is really unfortunate, and I think shouldn't conclude without at least mentioning many people who've lost loved ones or have been harmed by this pandemic. But I also think that there's going to be a lot of growth and innovation from having been through this experience. And I hope at least one thing we take away is the ability to be inclusive of all sorts of people who before might have been overlooked, but now I think we've been able to include, and I hope we keep including them.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. This has been Jewish Life. My name is Stewart Ain. Until next week, have a good one.